Good morning. I'm Paul Purcell. I will be your facilitator moderator for this morning's session on mental health and well-being. We've seen from numerous sources, multiple areas in all parts of the countries, the impacts that we are experiencing as a country, as a state, as a community, with things that affect our mental health and well-being on a daily basis. So with that being said, we want to remind everyone that this is your panel today. We are here to serve you. In fact, we encourage participation. We want you to ask questions. We've got the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And given the sensitive nature of the subject we're covering today, we have set the Q&A section to allow for anonymous questions. We have a great panel today that has been put together by Chief Gary Yandura of Brookhaven. And my job today is going to be to facilitate the questions and answers for the panel members after the presentation. So we will be looking for your input. Again, we want to give you the information that you can take to walk out the door when you leave your virtual conference seat today, and help you make a difference in your own life and the lives of those around you. So with that, the best thing I can do is turn it over to Chief Yandura. So Chief, welcome, and it's all yours.
Hi, I'm Gary Yandura, Chief of the Brookhaven Police Department. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Robbie Friedman, Nadia, and Brent for all their work and everyone else involved with setting up our virtual continuity summit that we're hosting this year. We've been asked to put together a mental illness panel with all the issues going on throughout our world, especially in our country and in our area right now. Everyone's dealing with an increase in mental illness, attempted suicides, domestics, homelessness. What we'd like to do is we put together a great panel that we'd like to present to you today, and they're coming up with ideas, discussion, and we'll answer questions afterwards as far as how we're dealing with it here in Brookhaven and how everyone else could deal with it, whether it be the private sector or law enforcement. Next, I'd like to introduce our panel of distinguished panelists. They're all experts in the field and been involved in dealing with mental illness and a lot of the issues that we're having. And then I'd also like to thank everyone for participating in this, and hopefully you'll get something out of it. Thank you all. First, I'd like to introduce our first panelist is Mrs. Kim Jones. Mrs. Jones is Executive Director of NAMI Georgia. NAMI is the National Alliance of Mental Illness and is the largest grassroots organization advocating on behalf of people affected by mental illness and health and their families. NAMI Georgia represents 20 NAMI affiliates across the state of Georgia who bring support, education, advocacy, and hope to their local communities, all through volunteers with lived experience. Most importantly, Kim is the very proud mother of a child recovering from mental illness. Kim Jones and myself work together on the Georgia NAMI board, where I'm also a board member.
Hello, I'm Kim Jones, the Executive Director of NAMI Georgia and the very proud mother of a child with a mental health condition. And I was asked to come today to speak to you about mental illness and just the basic understanding. And as you can imagine, all of us have mental health. There is mental illness versus mental health is described in a couple of different ways. Mental illnesses are conditions that affect a person's thinking, feeling, mood, or behavior, such as depression, anxiety, bipolar, or schizophrenia. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and well-being, and affects how we think and act. These terms are often used interchangeably, just like we interchange physical health. And just like physical health, if you have a condition such as heart disease or diabetes that impacts your life, you can have mental health conditions that impact your life. A person can have poor mental health without being diagnosed with a mental health condition, and a person can have mental illness and experience periods of mental, physical, and social well-being. When we look at mental illness across our population, the percentage of people who will experience a mental health condition throughout their lifetime is 50%. 1 out of 5 Americans will experience a mental health illness in a given year. 1 in 5 children will also experience a mental health condition. And 50 to 75% of our children in our juvenile justice system are children with mental health conditions as well. When we look at mental illness during COVID, A recent study found that people who experienced or had COVID were 3 times more likely to experience depression than other people without COVID. When we look at the risk factors associated with that, they include such things as stress, savings accounts less than $5,000, and our lower income populations. There are several common mental health illnesses. They include obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, bipolar disorders. Prior to COVID, the #1 calls that came to our helpline were involving questions about schizophrenia and bipolar. Since March of last year, the #1 and 2 calls have been about anxiety and depression. So we are seeing an increase in anxiety, depression, even at the national level. Some warning signs and symptoms of mental health include such things as being sad or withdrawn for over a 2-week period of time. Also, risk-taking behaviors, overwhelming fear, seeing or hearing things that are not there, drastic mood changes, difficulty concentrating, excessive drug or alcohol use, and attempts to harm yourself or others. Most behavioral health issues are often observed. One thing that we've recognized during COVID is without people being together, those observations are not happening as normal as when people are together. Just imagine if you're on a Zoom call, you're with somebody for about an hour and a half on a call, but you're not able to observe their mannerisms or their behavior or able to talk to them like you would with your in person. We often ask people to be intentional on checking on each other. There are several different treatments for mental illness, and we call them treatments for recovery. Mental health conditions are conditions that people can recover from and live productive, normal lives. So those treatments used for recovery include such things as psychotherapy, medication, support groups, case management, self-help plans, and peer support. Peer support includes certified peer specialists and attending groups where other people who are experiencing mental health conditions can share their experience, strength, and hope. These support groups are also offered by NAMI in the form of family support groups and connection support groups. That leads us to our next section, which are the NAMI resources. NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, is a national and international organization. We have over 800 affiliates across the continents. There are 4 pillars to our organization. They include education, awareness, advocacy, and support. In education, I am just listing a few that we offer here at NAMI Georgia. Many of these programs vary from NAMI affiliate to NAMI affiliate and are tailored to be structured towards what is best for their local community. We have programs such as the Introduction to Behavioral Health and Addictive Diseases, which gives an overview of mental health and includes de-escalation and self-care techniques. We also have workshops for self-care plans called peer-to-peer, family-to-family classes, which provides caregivers and family members support on how to help their loved ones who are experiencing a mental health condition. And then we also have crisis intervention team training. We here in Georgia started the crisis intervention team training for our state, and we now continue to do the crisis intervention team for youth, which helps resource officers and anyone who interact with children how to de-escalate and help children who are in crisis. NAMI also has awareness campaigns. They include such things as In Our Own Voice, which is a presentation by somebody with a lived experience. Ending the Silence, which is a presentation by a young adult who experienced a mental health condition while they were a child. And that presentation also includes a parent who had a child with a mental health condition. Another awareness campaign that most NAMIs participate in is called NAMI Walks. NAMI Walks is a free annual awareness walk for people who support people living with mental health conditions. Under support, NAMI offers peer support groups called NAMI Connection Support Groups. They are available for people living in recovery. We also offer family support groups available for family and caregivers and loved ones who live with mental health challenges. Most NAMIs also offer a resource helpline. Also, our NAMI National Office offers a resource helpline as well. Many states and areas have what are called crisis and access lines. These are phone lines that are available for people to call if they or their loved one are experiencing a mental health crisis. They are staffed by trained professionals, usually psychologists, psychiatrists, and counselors, to help walk people through de-escalating a crisis in their home or wherever they may be. They also will, in the case of here in Georgia, our Georgia Crisis and Access Line will come out to you on site if need be. As I mentioned, National Alliance on Mental Illness is available in 800 locations across the world. You can find them by going to NAMI.org and looking up for a location near you. I thank you and your colleagues for your interest in mental health and your support in helping us end stigma for mental health.
Next, I'd like to introduce Lori Freeman. Lori is a proud mother of 2 young adults. Her family experience in mental health sparked her involvement in mental health awareness, education, and advocacy. She is vice chair of DeKalb's Criminal Justice Treatment Coalition and supports DeKalb County's Mental Misdemeanor Health Court. Lori is chair of the DeKalb County Full Court Press, a basketball tournament funding much-needed participation in the DeKalb Mental Health Court. She's public safety training center host advocate for a 5-day crisis intervention team training of Georgia's law enforcement. She's a member of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and she's a mental health family support presenter and connector. She's a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin and a resident of Brookhaven, Georgia.
Hi, my name is Lori Freeman, and it is a pleasure to be here today to present my experience as a family member involved in mental health. My son in 2011 was a sophomore in college. His dream was to become a veterinarian, and he loved animals. He had had a great childhood. However, one night in the fall of that year, as you may know from your own family experiences, there were some twists and turns that were unexpected. One night, my son was not acting himself, and I did not know what was wrong. Though I had some suspicions that something had to do with a mental health issue, I didn't know for sure what it was. Backing up just a bit, when my son was young, at age 5, he was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. For those of you who are not familiar with this, it is not a mental illness. It is a neurological disorder that manifests itself in motor tics and verbal tics, which cannot be controlled. He suffered from this from age 5 through 18, and then really miraculously it began to wane, which means that the symptoms began to subside. However, growing up with these kinds of issues and challenges was very difficult. As you can imagine, as a child, to be twitching and shouting and cursing, which is called coprolalia in the Tourette's world, is not something any parent or child would wish upon themselves. However, Jason maintained a great attitude, and he did things that other kids did too. He kept a great outlook. He was the catcher on his little league team. He played basketball and baseball through high school. And I'd like to mention too that he has a little sister, Jessica. And I mention this because many times in the mental health world, we focus on the person with a mental health issue and may forget that there's others in the family that are involved and play an important role in their recovery. Whatever Jason did, my daughter did. If he was a catcher, she was going to be a catcher. She was a catcher on an all-boys baseball team for many years. Wore a bow about 2 times in her hair. But Jason was able to learn to advocate for himself, and I, of course, became an advocate very early when he was diagnosed with Tourette's. I joined the Tourette's local organization. I joined the national organization. My son joined a support group. My daughter joined a support group for siblings. Fast forwarding, in college, Jason started college a little later than usual, and that night in 2011, he was preparing for a final exam when the only way I can describe it is that a dark cloud appeared in our home that night and poured torrential rain on his life. I had no idea what was happening. He was not himself. This is a child who still to this day, and he's 35 today, calls me mommy. He was really acting like he was in another world. I had no idea who to call. It was close to midnight. For some reason, I thought to call 911. I decided that maybe someone would be able to help me help my child. And like many of you today, you are first responders and every day go through things that are extremely challenging, very stressful. I'd like to say that as a parent, in a way, though not on the same level that you are, we are also first responders. I'm my son's first responder. And that evening, the only thought I had was that my son was not well, and I had to protect him and get him the help that he needed. Now, 911 was called, 3 officers came, and in their defense, their experience told them that what needed to happen that evening was to protect me. There was a television on the floor, there was a hole in a door. This was very unlike my son's character. I tried to explain that this was not like him. However, their focus was on me. So to be truthful and completely transparent, I didn't know any more than they did at that point. The BL, as my sister says, the bottom line is that they arrested my son despite the fact that he was crying and had no idea himself what was going on. 24 hours later, he had a full psychotic break in jail. I saw him a week later. He spent 8 weeks in the county jail. During that time, I learned to become an advocate again. He had not yet been diagnosed with schizophrenia. That took several weeks. I hired a forensic psychiatrist, a private one, to come and assess my son, and after a 3-hour time period with him, he did tell me that he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. I had no idea what schizophrenia was. I knew everything about Tourette's. I knew nothing about schizophrenia, but soon I would learn. The first people I called were my family members. Then I contacted NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I started attending classes. I started connecting myself with other family members. People ask me, why didn't you bail him out? Why didn't you bond Jason out and just get him home? The reason I didn't do that was he was extremely ill. He was not making sense. He was totally psychotic at that point. I had nowhere for him to go. He certainly couldn't be at home. So my goal at that point was to get him the help he needed and into a private, if possible, residential treatment facility. Well, as it turned out, Jason was found not competent at that time to be on trial, and he was able to get into the state after 8 weeks and having lost 40 pounds. He was sent to the state hospital, Georgia Regional, where he was for 3 or 4 months. I saw him every night for 4 months. It was a 45-minute ride to and from our home. I was a single mom at that time. I drove to see him every night. I'd like to share that one of the reasons I'm an advocate today, and I always get a lump in my throat when I say this, is my experience at Georgia Regional was this. My son got so much better during the time period he was there. Despite people my age who may have seen Cuckoo's Nest, it was nothing like that. They were very attentive, they were wonderful. Though he was in a forensic unit, he didn't have to wear an orange jumpsuit, thank God, anymore, but he did have to stay with those who had been charged with a misdemeanor. The one thing I wanted to mention was that in the 4 months that I would visit my son, only one other couple came to visit their loved one. There must have been 16 individuals on that unit, and my heart went out to them. And by the way, when you even go to the Georgia Regional, you're not allowed to hug your child. I was able to talk with him, but we were not able to give a hug or a kiss. Sometimes the nurse would turn the other way and let me. He got through Georgia Regional, and then qualified for the DeKalb County Misdemeanor Mental Health Court. And for those of you who are not familiar, I would encourage you in your hometowns to look up whether your county has a mental health court. There are many today. They're accountability courts is what they are termed today. They are for people who have been charged either with a misdemeanor crime or in some cases a felony that is related in some way, their charges, to a mental health issue. In my son's case, it was very clear, based on his history, that his was a mental health issue, and so he qualified for this court. What happens in this court? Well, for a period of 1.5 years, my son would have to report weekly to the judge. He learned to interact with other people in the court. He, unlike everyone else who qualified for that court, was the only one who was able to get into a private psychiatric facility. My son was at a private psychiatric facility, residential facility here in town for 8 months. Every week he would call his caseworker. I became very knowledgeable through the court system about the judge, the program, and in time I morphed from an advocate for my son to an advocate for those other people in the court, to an advocate for those in our community. And after the 8-month period that Jason came out, and he's doing great today, I became involved with NAMI. I became very involved with crisis intervention team training. I would encourage all officers and security people who have not had the privilege of joining a CIT class to please sign up. Through CIT, I was able as a family advocate to present to officers, and thanks to my sweet son who gave me the permission to present, we probably have had an opportunity to interact with hundreds and hundreds of officers. The CIT experience was such a blessing. I learned many things. One, that we need to find common ground. Two, that listening is a very important skill. It wasn't my strong point prior to this journey. I have learned that officers have a job to do just like I do as a parent. And we became friends, many of the officers and myself. And today I sit on the board of the misdemeanor mental health court, the same court that my son went through. And for 2 years we have held a basketball tournament which held 16 teams of law enforcement and first responders all playing basketball to raise money for the participants in the court who were not as fortunate as my son to have family, to have the finances and resources that they need to attain recovery. So I guess there are many things I would love to talk about, but I guess to summarize, it would be that we know what we understand, and we tend to do what we have successfully completed. We tend to repeat what we do if we have successfully completed it, and then we can share what we understand and know that we can replicate successfully. So I would encourage everyone to connect with your resources in your hometown. And if possible, I am always happy to connect with anyone. I don't care where you live, and perhaps we can share some ideas and work together to make mental health a continuing priority for yourself as officers, for our community, for our families and extended families. And I consider it a blessing that I am here today. So thank you for your time. I appreciate you.
Our next panelist I'd like to introduce is Lieutenant Abram Ayana. Lieutenant Ayana joined the Brookhaven Police Department as a patrol officer in May of 2015. Before joining the Brookhaven Police Department, Lieutenant Ayana was a proud member of the Clayton County Police Department, where he served admirably as a field training officer and a post instructor. Shortly after joining the Brookhaven Police Department, he became the department's crisis intervention training officer. In this role, he worked toward the goal of training all department personnel in the Memphis model of crisis intervention training. To date, nearly 70% of the Brookhaven officers have received training to recognize the signs and symptoms of mental illness. With a passion for providing the best police service for the Brookhaven community, Lieutenant Ayana has had the pleasure of establishing Brookhaven Police Department's partnership with Behavioral Health Link. Through this partnership, Brookhaven Police has mental health professionals in the police department to provide the most professional and efficient mental health resources to our community. Lieutenant Ayana was recognized as a Supervisor of the Year in 2019 by his peers for his advocacy for mental health and his efforts in making Brookhaven Police Department one of the premier law enforcement agencies in the state of Georgia. Our next distinguished panelist is Victoria Williams, LPC, Behavioral Health Link Mobile Crisis Clinician. Ms. Williams has been employed with Integrated Health Resources, doing business as Behavioral Health Link for 7 years. She began with the mobile crisis team as a field care consultant and was later promoted to a mobile crisis clinician after receiving her licensure as a licensed professional counselor. In her role as a clinician, Ms. Williams responded to crisis-level calls with the severely mentally ill and homeless population, and also served as a trainer for her hires and interns. She also currently partners with Grady EMS on the Grady 7170 truck, that's a psych truck, which aims to reduce emergency room recidivism and provides alternate treatment options for individuals who would ultimately be arrested for minor charges in response to their mental substance abuse health. She has served as a liaison with multiple community mental health partners in finding the best treatment options for clients while also increasing awareness. Okay. Ms. Williams received her Bachelor of Science in Psychology at Southern Arkansas University and her Master of Arts in Professional Counseling from Argosy University. Throughout her internship and other positions, she has developed the skill of exceptional rapport building with both clients and their families with the overall goal of meeting the client's needs in every interaction.
Brookhaven Police assist an increasing number of community members with behavioral health conditions, as well as their families who are concerned about them on a daily basis. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, nearly 1 in 5 U.S. adults live with a mental illness. This number represented roughly 20% of all U.S. adults. As the isolation of the COVID-19 pandemic continues, Brookhaven officers are encountering more individuals experiencing mental health crises, with the goals of increasing the safety of those individuals and the officers who encounter them, and to help families and individuals in crisis access appropriate community services. Brookhaven Police established a partnership with Behavioral Health Link to form a mental health co-responder program, the Brookhaven Police Crisis Intervention Team. The co-responder program is one element of the department's comprehensive wellness program, which includes a peer support team with trained peer counselors. Peer support provides officers with emotional and tangible support in times of crisis. Mental health and crisis intervention are two issues that law enforcement officers deal with on a daily basis. Studies have determined that as many as 7 to 10% of police contacts in the United States have involved persons with mental illnesses, with a disproportionate amount of these encounters resulting in arrest, usually for minor offenses. The lack of mental health crisis services across the U.S. has resulted in law enforcement officers serving as first responders to most crises. A crisis intervention program, most known as CIT, is an innovative, community-based approach to improve the outcomes of these encounters. In communities nationwide, CIT programs create connections between law enforcement, mental health providers, hospital emergency services, and individuals with mental illness and their families. Through collaborative community partnerships and intensive training, CIT improves communications, identifies mental health resources for those in crisis, and ensures officer and community safety. CIT programs enjoy broad support as they can also help keep people with mental illness out of jail and in treatment, on the road to recovery. That is because diversion programs like CIT reduce arrest of people with mental illness, while simultaneously increasing the likelihood that individuals will receive mental health services. As greater focus is placed on police use of force, it is worth noting that persons with a mental illness are believed to account for approximately 25% of fatal police shootings. Because of the fragmented mental illness treatment system, police are frequently dispatched to respond to incidents involving persons with mental illness. This contributes to the increased contacts by law enforcement. By deploying a co-responder unit as a component of our police service, the Brookhaven Police Department is further advancing our mission of enhancing the quality of life for those within our community through high-quality, professional, and effective police service in partnership with the community. Through our partnership with the Behavioral Health Link, BHL staff assist officers in dealing with individuals experiencing a mental health crisis to foster the safety of everyone. We hope to reduce the frequency of law enforcement interactions, reduce unnecessary trips to hospital emergency rooms, and help those with mental illness by connecting them with other community-based resources. The Brookhaven Police CIT is modeled after the well-known Memphis model. The foundational training for all officers is the standard 40-hour CIT training curriculum now maintained by the Georgia Public Safety Training Center. Over 50% of Brookhaven police officers have been trained in this curriculum and employ CIT in their daily work. Prior to the partnership with the Behavioral Health Link, officers relied on a state crisis response framework, which, while beneficial, is often taxed due to the large areas they cover. Through this partnership, Brookhaven Police now have a mental health professional in-house 40 hours a week to respond to calls for service and conduct follow-ups in the community in response to officer referrals.
Hi, I'm Victoria Williams, licensed professional counselor for the state of Georgia, and I am one of the new counselors that will be working with the co-response team with Brookhaven Police Department. I am here to do assessments for individuals in the community that are showing any kind of mental health, behavioral health, substance abuse, or intellectual disability concerns. So when the officer receives a call stating that there's something going on with the actual individual, they will then call on me to come and to do a brief assessment, about 30 or 40 questions, depending on what's going on. I will complete the assessment and then provide a linkage. The linkage will either be to an outpatient agency where they're able to go and see a therapist or a psychiatrist on a weekly basis, or going to inpatient, which is usually an ER or a mental health facility. It varies with different individuals, being that because we're a voluntary service, we basically allow them to make those decisions for themselves. Individuals have rights, so if someone does not want to speak with us, then we don't make them do so. So we try to do what we can. Though if a person is showing excessive, psychotic features and doing things that could be a harm to themselves or someone else in the community, then of course we have to take different steps to make sure that they're going to be safe. So a lot of the barriers to that can be, of course, them not wanting to consent for services, also just having the access to those different agencies. Right now, everything has gone to virtual, so that makes it a little bit more difficult for individuals to be open to being seen through a phone or on a computer. When this person is in psychosis, there's not always comfortable for them to want to speak or talk to someone on a phone or computer, depending on what their delusions or hallucinations may be. And also we have the barriers when it comes to whether they have insurance or whether they don't. We have access to various agencies that are community service boards and also just regular for-profit agencies that could assist individuals without insurance to provide them with needs. And then we also have different resources for individuals with insurance. A lot of individuals do not know exactly how to access their insurance companies and gather the information that they need as far as finding a therapist or a psychiatrist for their needs. And so that's also something that I provide. I also provide information for substance users for detox and rehabilitation purposes. I would also provide resources for services for individuals of the IDD population, the intellectual and developmentally disabled. We have access to BCBAs, which is a board-certified behavioral analyst. They have access to state services and other resources that could help the individuals and the caregivers of those in need.
As first responder suicide continues to be an increasing threat to law enforcement officers, the Brookhaven Police Department, CIT, also train to serve their peers. Here are some alarming facts about law enforcement suicides. Suicide is the leading cause of death for police officers alongside accidents. An average of 11 police officers commit suicide every month. Police officers are almost 3 times as likely to complete suicide as being killed by a felon. On average, 140 to 150 officers commit suicide each year. That's according to Blue Help, a group that is helping police departments with this problem. 236 law enforcement suicides were self-reported in 2019 to Blue Line Help. The current number of law enforcement suicides for 2020 is at 149. In current research, ages 35 to 39 were at the highest risk of suicide, as were officers with 10 to 14 years in law enforcement. Because of the stigma surrounding mental health, officers often feel they cannot talk to anyone or get help. Officers are afraid of being labeled and losing their job. With the continuing deterioration in police-community relations, officers are experiencing an increase in stress and isolation. Recently, departments nationwide have seen an increase in officers reporting post-traumatic stress after their involvement in the response to this summer's unrest. This is exacerbated by the current coronavirus pandemic, which has claimed the lives of 140 law enforcement officers in the United States to date. A recent survey of Los Angeles police officers found that more than 86% of officers do not feel supported by their chief. Nationwide, we see the impact that the call for defunding police has had on departures from the profession. According to the National Institute of Justice, the following are work-related and individual factors that are likely to cause stress and fatigue in law enforcement officers. Poor management, inadequate equipment and manpower, constant exposure to people suffering distress and pain, the dangers of the job, the responsibility of protecting the lives of citizens, having to be in control of emotions even when provoked, and the quickly alternating pace of the job. The consequences of that stress include cynicism and suspiciousness, emotional detachment from various aspects of daily life, reduced efficiency, absenteeism and early retirement, excessive aggressiveness, which may trigger an increase in citizen complaints, alcoholism and other substance abuse problems, marital or other family problems, for example, extramarital affairs, divorce, or domestic violence, post-traumatic stress disorder, heart attacks, ulcers, weight gain, and other health problems, and suicide. In order to reduce the stress that is inherent to the job, it is imperative that law enforcement agencies promote employee wellness, encouraging their officers to exercise, participate in healthy activities, practice good nutrition, have a safe way to vent, and having strong social support outside of work. Simply, cops need to have non-cop friends. In closing, I would like to stress the importance of annual mental health checkups. Done like an annual physical exam or dental cleaning, the mental health check affords law enforcement personnel the opportunity to examine the past year, review what has worked well and can be reinforced, and determine what has not worked so well. They also have the ability to seek private or professional counseling when needed. These sessions are private and protected by law. Find someone to talk to about things you may be experiencing. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the National Police Foundation created the National COVID-19 Grant Relief Program. This program allows first responders and survivors of first responders an opportunity to request a grant to reimburse select COVID-19 related expenses, such as mental health and wellness costs. This includes counseling services and suicide prevention, unanticipated dependent care, disinfecting services, and similar costs. These micro grants may be awarded in an amount up to $1,000.
Some of the things that you could do on your own would be to, of course, focus on your diet and exercise, making sure that you're eating right, getting enough water, and you're taking the time to get in at least in 30 minutes of activity a day. Being sure to get better sleep. Sleep is very important. So when most people say 8 hours is essential. Also limiting our caffeine. I know that's going to cause some concerns with most of our law enforcement and other professionals, but caffeine does also aid in keeping your system going and keeping you anxious at times when you shouldn't. So that's something that I think everyone should probably look at, how much they're consuming every day. Also, making sure that you are delegating tasks, not trying to do everything yourself. Making sure that you're doing certain things and allowing others to do things that you know that they can do well. Not overworking. Overworking doesn't always help as much as we believe it does, and sometimes it's important that we take our breaks and take our days off when we need to assess kind of what's going on and make sure that we're getting the rejuvenation that we need on a weekly basis. Also, laughing. Laughter is major. Laughing with your partners, laughing with others, just trying to get back to where you feel like you can be a relaxed person and getting some realness in when you can. And then also hobbies, making sure that you're doing different things, working on things, working on the house. I know that can sometimes be stressed, but working on things that are going to be fun for you, that can kind of distract you from what you go through on a daily basis. When you try to incorporate things like that, and it kind of assists in slowing your mind down, I would say yoga and also meditating, but I know some people kind of, whatever about that. But that's also a good way to help in slowing your mind and slowing you down and allowing you to kind of get back to where you need to be before you come back to work. And taking time for yourself. just, you know, most people just take rides in the car. Some people take, you know, space off on the weekends, just doing things that you enjoy doing, watching things that you like to watch, which will help you kind of get back to where you need to. Thank you for being a part of this summit. We are very excited about our new co-response team, and we're hoping that it brings about some change here in the near future.
Thank you all for your participation and your interest in mental health. To all of our law enforcement partners, thank you all for your selfless service. To our business partners, thank you for your support. And to the overwhelming American public who supports law enforcement, your help and your support is unspeakable. We are immensely grateful for your gratitude and your thanks, and our service will continue.
Well, thank you very much, Chief, for putting that panel together. That was some great information. We have a couple of questions that have come in. We are a private sector organization. Where could we find crisis intervention team or CIT training, or are there any entry-level training sources how to help with mental issues with either officers or civilian mental wellness issues?
Lieutenant, I'll let you answer that one.
Yes. Good morning to everyone. So one of the things that we like to do is, outside of the CIT program, we participate in what is known as mental health first aid. Mental health first aid is actually not just a law enforcement or public safety specific program. It is something that is available to everyone in the public. So you can look at mental health first aid. They provide great, excellent resources, as well as the QPR Institute. The QPR Institute is a suicide prevention collaborative that they work to provide resources for suicide prevention in the workplace. So I would point people to mental health first aid as well as the QPR Institute for better resources for their private businesses.
Well, thank you. Kim, you had a great presentation in your portion of the panel. Do you have other information to piggyback off of this about where people can get additional training?
Yes, I would recommend notifying or getting a hold of your local NAMI and see what classes they provide. Our Introduction to Behavioral Health and Addictive Diseases for our local community is what we offer, but each NAMI probably has a different thing that they offer, and most of them are tied into the things that were just mentioned as well.
Thank you. Next up is, given the stigma surrounding the seeking of help, do you have any additional phone lines that are guaranteed anonymous with 24-hour access?
Yeah, so for law enforcement, there's a COP line. COP line is an organization that is typically staffed by retired law enforcement professionals. They can be researched at copline.org. I've used Copline. It's an excellent resource to talk with law enforcement persons who can just give you an open ear and to give you some ways to cope with what you're feeling. Copline is an excellent resource. Another, because a large amount of our law enforcement tend to be veterans, is the Veterans Crisis Line. The Veterans Crisis Line is an excellent resource as well. And then also the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is available to anyone. And then lastly, but not least, is bluehelp.org. Blue Help is the organization that I alluded to in the presentation that tracks law enforcement suicides on an annual basis through self-reporting. They provide a lot of excellent resources for law enforcement. And they also have links to connect law enforcement with peer counselors in the region, as well as therapists who are known to work with law enforcement.
Thank you. Thank you. We have time probably for just one more. Victoria Williams gave some great tips for self-care. Does the panel have any additional tips on self-care or ways to help care for someone around you who's experiencing an emotional or a mental health issue?
I think just asking people how they're doing and trying to connect with them and checking in with them is one of the most important things that we could do, especially now during COVID. Just trying to have that connectiveness. Connectiveness is the number one thing that helps keep us healthy. We are social beings. And so just making sure that we are making an effort to connect with each other and checking in on each other would be one of the first things that I would recommend for all of us to do, especially for our loved ones, our older population, people who we know are isolated due to COVID.
Does anyone on the panel have an additional point to make now that you've gone through the presentation and answered a couple of questions. Is there something that you would like to say? You know, what should have been covered is?
I wanted to stress the importance of a third party, if possible, to help a family in need. This gave me an opportunity to be a mom instead of being the psychiatrist and the coach and the law enforcement officer.
And Paul, if I could add, I can't preach enough the importance of EAP programs and having access to resources for all of our frontline personnel. It's important that they know that there are psychological services available. EAP and therapy is not needed for just people who are experiencing a crisis. It's a great opportunity to go and just get things off of your chest. So while we in Brookhaven didn't have any unrest ourselves, several of our officers were affected by the unrest that was happening in Atlanta and around the country, and the condemnation that was befalling the profession, and they needed someone to talk to. And so having peer counselors in our agency and having a strong, robust EAP program with access to professional therapy aided a lot of our officers through what has been going on this year.
Well, I think that brings up the point, and the important thing is for everyone just to take care of their teams, whether it be the private sector or public sector. And to give you a good example of what the lieutenant just said, we had an unfortunate suicide that occurred in front of some business people and our officers a couple of weeks ago, and all of them came in, and Victoria helped us out with a lot of that. So it's important to take care of your own team too, as well as the people that we serve.
Yes, sir. It's so major. I try to, as much as possible when I'm out in the field, to just ask officers and firemen and everyone how their day's going. You know, when's the last time they took a day off? You know what I mean? Just when's the last time they laughed? Because it's so important. We can get so, you know, in the scheme of things of our days and our work weeks, and we don't realize how much we're not paying attention to ourselves and how we're not taking care of ourselves, and it can get lost on you so fast. So it's so important that when you have a moment to ask a partner, ask someone, hey, how you doing? You know, and you'd be surprised. They're not always going to be private. They're going to let you know. And when they do, just kind of refer them and let them know where they can go to get help, or, you know, that you're just there to listen. I'm guarantee it'll be appreciated.
Thank you. We've had a couple of additional questions come in. This has been a very great presentation and an important topic. One question is, in the event of loss of life involving actions taken by the individual suffering mental illness or actions taken by others, including law enforcement, how can medical examiners obtain training and access to evaluation so that accurate manner of death can be determined?
I have to say, that's the first time I've heard that question. What an interesting perspective, and my hats go off to the medical examiners. But one thing I just wanted to say is that not all suicides are committed by people with a mental illness. You can actually have someone commit suicide who isn't mentally ill. So that's something to just kind of know and think about and understand about that. But I don't know the answer to that question. It just was something I did want to put out there so that people had a better understanding of how mental health and mental illness work.
Well, like a lot of topics that are brought up by the Business Continuity Summit, this is certainly an opportunity to network, even though with the COVID setting, we have to do it remotely, but this might be a good topic for further discussion offline. We're unfortunately out of time, but I would like to thank you all again, not only for being here today and for the expertise you've shared, but for what each of you do as individuals, for your teammates, for your community, and for the state of Georgia. So thank you very much to everyone.